This is Euronews Tonight. Here are your headlines. Russia launches new attacks on Chernihiv despite a promise by Moscow to scale back its offensive, with the Kremlin now saying there was no breakthrough at the latest round of peace talks. Germany braces itself for gas rationing, activating its emergency fuel plan should Putin turn off the taps. The UN says over 4 million people have now fled Ukraine in the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War.
And one of Russia's last independent newspapers, Novaya Gazeta, has officially suspended operations.
I'm Helena Humphrey. Good to have you with us. Less than a day after peace talks in Istanbul, Russia resumed its assault on Ukraine. Despite Russia's pledge to cut back military operations in both Chernihiv and Kyiv, shelling persists. In Chernihiv, the attacks have intensified, and Ukrainian officials accuse Moscow of stepping up attacks in the east. Daniel Bellamy reports on the latest movements on the ground.
An international Red Cross warehouse has been hit by Russian airstrikes in Mariupol, Ukraine's Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights has posted on Facebook. The Red Cross says its staff are no longer there and the warehouse was mostly empty. It's just too dangerous. But elsewhere in the city, satellite images show people in queues, most likely for food. And the shelling continues in Kyiv and here in Chernihiv, two cities Russia promised on Tuesday it would stop shelling. But it hasn't. Chernihiv was shelled throughout the night, according to its regional governor. Meanwhile, Volodymyr Zelensky has been addressing another Western parliament. On Wednesday, he asked Norwegian MPs to sell more of their oil and gas to the EU, so that it doesn't have to rely so much on Russian energy. And he also asked for more weapons. Freedom must be better armed than evil, he said. After 5 weeks of war, there's still no sign that Russia's military onslaught might be winding down. On Wednesday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said there'd been no breakthrough at talks in Istanbul with the Ukrainian delegation and that, quote, "we cannot claim anything very promising." In recent days, top military officials have twice said their main goal now is the, quote, liberation of this eastern region, the Donbass.
To tell us more about the situation in Ukraine, we're joined in the studio by our correspondent, Sasha Vakulina. Sasha, good to see you. Actions speak louder than words. And we heard those promises from Moscow yesterday about de-escalation. We've seen the situation in Chernihiv and Kyiv. It appears promises have been broken.
Well, it looks like it. Yesterday, last night, there was the moment when there was almost no area in Ukraine without air raid sirens. This is the situation that it continues. Also, Ukraine Defense Ministry say that they are seeing the signs that Russian forces are preparing to resume. Now they're also targeting Mariupol still. They're not giving up on their hopes and their plans to take over the besieged city of Mariupol, and also the way they want to do it would be on encircling Ukrainian troops that are now in the east of the country.
President Zelensky's been speaking to Norwegian lawmakers. Often when he makes these addresses, he makes a call for more weapons support, for example. This time he was talking about more support when it comes to gas and energy, which I think really highlights another aspect of this war.
Certainly, that's a massive strategic weapon there and to leverage. And this is one of the biggest concerns for Europeans. You remember in the beginning with the invasion, before Russia invaded Ukraine, there was the conversation regarding the Nord Stream 2 and its importance. Currently, Russia supplies around 40% of all the EU gas needs, and this will be rather hard to replace. This is what Zelensky had to say about it.
You can make a decisive contribution to the energy security of Europe by providing the necessary resources both for the countries of the European Union and for Ukraine. We already started the dialogue on the supply of about 5 billion cubic meters of gas for the next heating season. And I do hope that this will become the basis for our long-term cooperation in this area.
The recent agreement between the European Union and the United States saying that the US would help with that is very good for the European Union, but this one is not enough. So Europe would have to look for other supply and other countries, for example, Qatar, that could potentially help. There are some negotiations between European countries and Qatar now happening. But they will have to move rather quick, because on one hand, somehow time-wise, now we are out of the cold season in Europe, therefore they do have time to find a solution until next winter. But in order to have enough gas for next winter, they would have to start stocking up on this gas starting from now until winter.
Critical point to make, Sasha Vakalina, as ever. Thank you so much. Well, Germany has triggered an early warning system over its gas supply as a standoff between Berlin and Moscow over how supplies are paid for continues. Now, Economy Minister Robert Habeck told consumers and businesses to reduce their consumption, saying every kilowatt hour counts. So for more on what this could mean for Germany, let's go over to Jona Schallgren in Berlin. Jona, does Germany now think that there is the likelihood of seeing a disruption to its supply of gas, that this could be imminent?
Well, they're certainly thinking it's a possibility, and this obviously comes down to Russia demanding rubles for the gas that they're selling to Germany and other EU countries, and the G7 and the EU saying, well, we're not going to do that. So they're thinking there might be a conflict there, and that could impact on the export of gas from Russia, import to Germany. So they've introduced this first level of danger, so to speak, asking everyone to be careful and not use too much gas. This is a 3-level system. On the 3rd level, there'll be a prioritization where they say businesses will no longer get gas, consumers, homes will get it in order to keep the homes warm. But at this first level, it's really just saying, please be careful, please remember that we might have problems in the future. But it's certainly an interesting move, or a big move from the German government to indicate that they're thinking this could potentially be a problem this year.
So that's what the German government is asking consumers to do. But as it makes its planning during this first level of danger, of warning, where is it looking itself to make up the energy shortfall?
Well, there's 3 ways to do this. The first way is obviously to reduce gas consumption. They've already asked people and businesses to do that. The second way is obviously to increase imports from other places, like you've heard there, Qatar or Norway, bringing in gas from all of these places. And the third way is to look at other ways to produce energy in Germany. This could be, for example, to use the coal-powered plants a bit more to produce electricity using coal rather than gas, or it could be to look at potentially rapidly expanding renewable energy. This is something that the German government is already doing, but they might want to push that even more now when you have this problem with the gas imports. And there's obviously one way that a lot of people are mentioning, but the German government is unlikely to take that step, and that is to not shut down the 3 nuclear power plants that are supposed to be shut down this year. That is something that the Green members of this German government is unlikely to agree to. But those would be the ways to kind of get away from the Russian gas if there is an import stop from Russia. And what we're probably going to see is a combination of these 3 ways in order to survive this winter, if it comes to being a winter without Russian gas.
All right, Jona Schallgren in Berlin. Jona, thank you so much. The UN's Refugee Agency says that more than 4 million refugees have now fled Ukraine. The UNHCR says it is the fastest exodus globally since World War II, and it's still increasing. Poland has absorbed the most people, with more than 2.3 million Ukrainians entering the country.
I think 4 million people is roughly the population of Los Angeles. I'm from the US, but imagine every single person in a massive metropolis suddenly being forced from their homes, their communities, everything they know. So it's, you know, we mark this as a milestone, but it's really, I think, a tragic indicator, but it also doesn't even capture the full scale of the conflict. We have 7 million IDPs within Ukraine. We have maybe 10 million people trapped and can't move. So actually 4 million, it's massive, but even that doesn't capture the true scale of what we're facing.
Well, in Budapest for us in Hungary is our correspondent Maeve McMahon. We can cross over to her now. Good to see you, Maeve. I understand that you've been at the border, you've been talking to people who've been trying to make their way into Hungary. What are their needs and how is Hungary helping them?
Good evening, Helena. That's right. In fact, this morning, in the early hours of the morning, I was brought into Ukraine, to Berechova, about 10 kilometres from the border in western Ukraine, along with humanitarian workers from the Order of Malta, who told me that so far 600,000 refugees have fled Ukraine into Hungary, and up to just a couple of days ago, 1,200 were entering every single day via that route that I saw just today. But today the situation was rather different. I just saw a couple of dozen refugees entering. They said there's a couple of reasons for this. One, because the fact that many who wanted to flee have already fled, but also, and they couldn't confirm the exact details, but many who want to flee are trapped. They're trapped because Russian bombs have bombed bridges, which means they cannot leave and flee. So it was really quiet today. And they're also, of course, telling me about the various challenges that they're trying to foresee. And one of them, of course, is the exploitation, because most people that I saw today were women and young girls, like one girl who was on her way hopefully to Berlin on a bus with her cat Zen. It's mostly young women like her that are travelling, and that's why exploitation is a big issue. So I caught up with a humanitarian worker, Rachel, and asked her what was being done to address this really disconcerting issue for people who are already having a harrowing experience trying to flee war. Let's take a listen now to Rachel.
A relief center, a hotspot near to the border, the Hungarian-Ukrainian border crossing, Berecsas, and there are a lot of police officers in order to secure the place to prevent human trafficking. So we are in good hands at the hotspots.
It's worth pointing out as well to our viewers that where I was this morning in Berechova is in western Ukraine. It's a peaceful village of about 7,000 people, and it's far from the bombs. It's far from the destruction. It's a very poor neighbourhood. You can see that it's a very deprived region. You can tell the stark difference between EU member state Hungary and non-aspiring EU member state Ukraine. For example, the roads were full of potholes. There was so many petrol stations along the road, but they had no petrol. We saw people driving horse and carts, and lots of people driving old Lada cars. People there told me that they don't go for coffee. They make coffee at home. They don't buy bread. They make their bread at home, and that's the way they live, and in a very kind of decent way, far away from the EU quarter of Brussels.
Maeve McMahon in Hungary, in Budapest there. Thanks so much, Maeve. Boris Johnson has faced another call to resign over the Downing Street Partygate scandal. Labour leader Keir Starmer accused the Prime Minister of widespread criminality during the coronavirus lockdown, a day after London's Metropolitan Police Force said the first 20 fines for rule breaking would be handed out.
Talking of parties, Prime Minister, he told the House no rules were broken in Downing Street during lockdown. The police have now concluded there was widespread criminality. The Ministerial Code says that ministers who knowingly mislead the House should resign. Why is he still here?
Hang on a minute. Has he just changed his position? Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I mean, we do at least expect some consistency from this human weather vane. It was only a week or so ago where he was saying that I shouldn't resign. He's got to make what is his position, Mr. Speaker? The Met must the investigators must get on with their job. But in the meantime, they should. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we are going to get on with our job.
Joining me now from London is our reporter Vincent McAviney. Vinny, the Partygate scandal, as we just heard, was discussed there during Prime Minister's questions, but Johnson was also taken to task on tax rises, on the cost of living crisis as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. It's just a week since his Chancellor Rishi Sunak delivered the spring statement, which is a sort of mini budget. And there has been heavy criticism in the past couple of days of the impact it's going to have on the cost of living crisis that was already starting to bite families across the UK. So Labour went quite heavily on the fact that despite the Conservatives saying they're a party that believes in low taxes, they came into power at the last election with a manifesto pledging that they wouldn't raise taxes. They are, in fact, raising the taxes on working people, those that are drawn from your monthly salary payments in order to fund a bit of a black hole that's emerged in terms of community care and in the health service over the course of the pandemic. But what they have said is that they will reduce that back down in 2024, conveniently just before the next general election. And the Scottish National Party also went heavily and criticised in the government in not doing more to help British people with the fuel bills, because fuel bills in the UK are rising by hundreds and hundreds of pounds. There isn't the same level of support coming across from places as in the French government's doing, where they're sort of doing a windfall tax on the energy companies in order to help reduce the costs. There is heavy criticism that there are people now across the UK, and we're hearing it from networks that hand out food to communities, that people are really having to choose between heating and eating because it is still incredibly cold in certain parts of the UK at the moment. So very heavily criticised over the state of government finances and the way that they're putting the burden of paying for those pandemic years on many families.
And we heard a call once again from Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, calling for Johnson to resign. But what is the sense among the public there in the UK, Vinny?
Well, you heard in that clip there that Sir Keir Starmer very much still going on the attack of Boris Johnson, particularly over that first batch of 20 fines given out yesterday by the Met Police over partying in Downing Street through the lockdown. We know that those are only just the first batch of fines, and that over 100 people, including the Prime Minister, including the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, have filled in that questionnaire. Now, Downing Street say we will be told about the Prime Minister and the most senior civil servant, Simon Case, getting fines if they do get them. But this is the same Downing Street operation that lied about the parties, that lied about the Prime Minister attending them. And it's been a drip, drip, drip of the information coming out with leaked videos, leaked photos. So whether or not we will actually find out remains to be seen. But what the Prime Minister actually did last night, despite the cost of living crisis, despite getting those fines, he took all of his MPs for a slap-up champagne dinner at a hotel in central London, where he gave a big speech. Now, this was an attempt to try to win back his party around him, because go back a few weeks ago at the height of this, at the beginning of February, there were many MPs unhappy, publicly calling for the Prime Minister to resign, putting in letters to call a vote of no confidence in a leadership race. So the Prime Minister now is trying to win them back. People on his side are trying to sort of force MPs that did put those letters in to withdraw them, saying, look at the situation in Ukraine, we need a stable government at this time. But many in the opposition parties, many other senior Conservatives, no longer MPs, but people who are elder party figures, saying, you know, it's not just about the parties, it is about trusting the Prime Minister. And if the Prime Minister has lied to Parliament, that is a sacred principle in the UK. He must go because he cannot be trusted with any other decisions. Now, the public polling for Johnson has been pretty low in the wake of the Partygate scandal. It is, of course, a nation of 65 million who all experienced some pretty tough lockdown rules, all very angry about this. But for now, the Prime Minister seems to be keeping himself busy with dealing with Ukraine, and he probably hopes that if he keeps going on that front, if he keeps trying to lead as a bit of a statesman, and there's only just this drip, drip, drip of the fines, he can try to ride it out. And particularly as there is a bit of a grey area as to whether or not his Downing Street team will actually tell us whether he receives one himself.
All right, Vincent McAviney in London. Vinny, thank you. One of Russia's last independent and most popular newspapers has officially ceased operations until the end of the war amid intense pressure from Moscow. Matthew and our team in the Cube have been looking at the last front page of the Novaya Gazeta.
Defiant until the end, Novaya Gazeta, one of Russia's last independent newspapers, has now officially ceased operations. This was their last front page that they posted today. The message, Procrustean lies, seemingly a reference to their forced closure. Novaya Gazeta has been reporting on corruption and human rights abuses in the country for nearly 30 years. But on Monday, the newspaper announced that it would be suspending operations online, on social media and in print, at least until the end of the war in Ukraine. The newspaper had received a second warning from Russia that it had allegedly failed in one of its articles to refer to an NGO as a foreign agent, something it has to do under Russian law. Since the start of the invasion, though, Novaya Gazeta has been defying Moscow to independently report on the war in Ukraine, going against the Kremlin argument that this is a special military operation. Just take a look at this newspaper front page that was published the day after the invasion began. Russia bombs Ukraine. However, since then, Novaya Gazeta has also been forced to remove a number of materials to comply with another controversial law on so-called fake news, a law that could see journalists imprisoned for up to 15 years. The forced closure of the newspaper has been described as a new low in the censorship of free media in Russia. The editor-in-chief, who was the joint winner of last year's Nobel Peace Prize, however, said it was a terrible decision but necessary to protect staff. And Helena, the Novaya Gazeta now joins a growing list of European organisations and news outlets that have been restricted or outright banned since the start of the war in Ukraine.
A dark day for press freedom. Matthew, thank you so much. More than 1,600 Ukrainian refugees have been offered temporary accommodation in the southern French port city of Marseille. As well as a bed and food, psychological support is also being offered in rather unconventional living quarters. Clémence Waller reports.
Accommodating the thousands of people fleeing the war in Ukraine has some local authorities having to think outside the box. For example, this ferry has been turned into a temporary place to stay.
This will be a floating hotel put at their disposal, but also social aids, health facilities, training, education for the children, childcare, as well as a creche will be made available.
While the refugees will be made as comfortable as possible, it is difficult for them to not worry about those they have left behind.
We are feeling depressed because my grandmother, she lives in Kharkiv. She's on 12th floor and she can't go down. So every time, every day, we are very worried for her. Even here, it's very calm, but still, we are not feeling peaceful because they are bombing every day.
The state-backed operation has tried to think of everything, including access to translators to help fill in necessary papers and to find a place to live.
Thanks for your company. I'll see you soon.